commitments and grounding or explanatory relations among the entities postulated by the theory. I argue that a realist theory of properties provides the best explanation of the facts captured in sentences 1 and 2. Remember, sentence 1 is A is F, 2 is A and B are both F. Right?
Escort.
All right.
Worry about pushing the package, not what's inside.
I consider
That's
what are,
above your pay grade.
plausible versions of nominalism, arguing that none explain qualitative and resemblance facts as well as realism. If metaphysical realism is a better theory than the most plausible versions of nominalism, it is reasonable to think that realism is a better theory than any version of nominalism. Nominalism. That is the theory classes versions don't exist. Only individuals exist. There is no such thing as a class of red things. There's only this red thing.
Push the package to the delivery zone. Watch for choke points.
This red thing. There are no classes of red things. Right? There is no universal red. Just red thing, right? So he calls this the ostrich. In other words, there are red objects, but there's no such thing as red things, right? No individual thing on the there are only red objects. Now, David Lewis is where David Lewis is, right? He calls this ostrich nominalism, right? Because like an ostrich, the nominalists is sticking their head in the sand, right? Why is that? Well, he quotes another famous philosopher here, W.B. Quine, arguably the most famous philosopher, American philosopher, who created the second half of the 20th century. And Quine wrote that the house and roses and sunsets are all of them red may be taken as ultimate and irreducible. But the problem for the resemblance, right? They argue that the nominalist, in particular, the kind of nominalist that
standing for hostiles,
duck that problem. Now, one last little bit. Talk a little bit about parsimony, right? That for any given scientific theory or any mathematical theory or what have you, right? You're better off forcing the theory that has fewer.
Target down.
Alright. Well, what about this debate on metaphysical realism versus nominalism? I now argue that ostrich nominalism is better than its realist competitor, and therefore worse off with respect to ontological non-development principles. Philosophers and scientists
Accompany the package. Keep it moving.
scanning for
Qualitative
hostiles.
parsimony has to do with the measure of quantitative parsimony has to do with the measure of things. Qualitative content is typically regarded as more important than quantitative.
Package in retreat.
That is to say, metaphysical. More qualitatively parsimonious than ostrich is the better theory overall, right? Recall, the ostrich is committed ontological to fundamental sorts of things. The use of predicates carries ontological commitments for the ostrich to characterize its things. While the metaphysical realist is committed to three, right? According to one version of realism discussed later, fundamental sorts of things, the ostrich novelist is committed to far more.
Revealing
For a
enemies.
metaphysical realist, red things are not fundamental sorts of things. Rather, red things are further explained in terms of particular, exemplifying the universal. Exemplifying. Fundamental things for the realist are the particular, universal, and the exemplification relation. So just three things: particular, universal, and the exemplification.
Package is losing ground, Agent.
Relation. Exemplification relation means here is particular, right? universal is red, and this object is exemplifying red. Right?
Loadout updated.
Right. For anomalous, for the ostrich anomalous, right? Red things along some dimension. And it follows realism, and not ostrich anomalism, qualitative or parsimonious.
End of round imminent, agent.
So,
you're on defense.
Following key
Stop the
camera,
package.
there are 2 facts in need of explanation. Qualitative facts identified in the A question, and resemblance facts identified in the B question. These facts can be expressed by the following sentences, where the variables A and B represent the subject, and the variable F represents the predicate. So sentence 1 is A is F. So we can take A as F to be, this button is red. And we can take sentence 2, A and B are both F, the button and the pack of gum are both red, right? Now it's important to note that qualitative and resemblance facts are different in kind. Qualitative facts point to a particular distinctiveness. For example, the fact that Rosie's red, 5 pounds, has 2 wings, lays eggs, and she likes to eat worms. Each of these facts is a distinctive qualitative fact about one and the same object, namely Rosie the chicken, right? Resemblance facts, however, on the other hand, point to the unity of the class of objects.
If the enemy
right?
passes a progress point,
Rosie and all other pregnant characters. All right. What constitutes and Gould tells us an adequate solution would explain these real-world qualitative and
badges are almost at a progress point.
right?
Regroup.
Such a solution requires a theory of properties and not merely a postulation of properties per se. Properties per se don't explain anything. You need a theory of properties.
Oh, maybe
Plato
we'll
gave us
do
a
the
theory of
revolution
properties.
tomorrow, eh?
And he posited 500 years ago universals exist and they're real and they exist outside of space and time. He called them properties, right? What are properties? Well, what is needed is a theory of properties, Gould says, that provides at a sufficient level of detail an account of what properties are like and what roles they play, as well as the ontological commitments and grounding or explanatory relations among the entities postulated by the theory. I argue that a realist theory of properties provides the best explanation of the facts captured in sentences 1 and 2. Remember, sentence 1 is A is F, 2 is A and B are both F, right? All right. I consider what are, in my opinion, 3 of the most prominent and plausible versions of nominalism, arguing that none explain qualitative and resemblance facts as well as realism. If metaphysical realism is a better theory than the most plausible versions of nominalism, it is reasonable to think that realism is a better theory than any version of nominalism. Nominalism. That is the theory that classes of things, universals, don't exist. Only individuals exist. There is no such thing as a class of red things. There's only this red thing, this red thing, this red thing. But there are no classes of red things, right? There is no universal red. There's just red things, right? So he calls this, he being Gould, calls this ostrich anomalism. And that's the view that there are charactered objects but not characteristics. There are ontological commitments to fundamental sorts of things and not just fundamental things simpliciter, right? In other words, there are
Take over the
objects,
capture
no such
zone.
thing as
Keep
red
out the
things,
basura.
right?
The situation has
No
changed. The
individual
capture
thing
zone is moving.
in the universe is participating in the universal red. They're only red objects, right? Now, David Lewis is
Protect the zone.
Famous metaphysician, right? He calls
Capturing
this
zone.
ostrich nominalism, right? Because he thinks it's like an ostrich. Nominalists is taking their heads, right? arguably the most famous philosopher, American philosopher, in the second half of the 20th century. Quine wrote that the house and roses and sunsets are always red, irreducible.
Zone in jeopardy. Capture zone contested. We're capturing.
They argue anomalous, and in particular,
Capture zone is changing location.
Now, one last little bit of consideration about this.
Go make some friends.
Also known as IQ, right? Scientific theory, what have you, right? Alright. What about this debate on metaphysical realism versus nominalism?
Zone imperiled.
I now argue that abstract nominalism is less ontological economic and therefore worse off with respect to the ontological economy. In other words, insofar as
Capturing.
philosophers and scientists,
Capture zone relocating.
quantitative parsimony. Qualitative parsimony has to do with the measure of fundamental sorts of things. Qualitative economy is usually regarded as more important than quantitative.
Zone at risk.
Since realism, that is to say metaphysical realism, is more qualitatively parsimonious than ostrich nominalism, it's the better theory overall, right? Recall, the
How
ostrich
fun.
is committed ontologically to fundamental sorts of things. The use of predicates carries ontological commitments for the ostrich to charactered objects, red things, sweet things, colored things, human things, and so on. While the metaphysical realist is committed to the three, right? According to one version of realism we'll discuss later, fundamental sorts of things, the ostrich nominalist is committed to
Go for the
more.
face!
For the metaphysical realist, red things are not fundamental sorts of things. Rather, red
Capture
things
zone
are
contested.
a particular
Capture zone is
exemplifying
changing location.
Universal redness. A particular exemplifying the universal redness. Right? Fundamental sorts of things.
Zone in
realist,
jeopardy.
the particular, the universal, and the exemplification relation. So just three things. Again, the particular, the universal, and the exemplification.
We're capturing.
Exemplification relation. Here is this particular, right? The universal is red. This object is exemplifying red, right? Alright. For
Your
nominalists,
team is ahead, and statistically speaking, you might win.
other character objects alongside them. But then it follows that realism and not ostrich nominalism is more parsimonious and a better overall.
Hostile echelon can see through walls now. Consider running rather than hiding. Capturing. Zone moving elsewhere. Park yourself in that capture zone. Zone imperiled. Capturing.
Capture the face!
Capture zone is on the move. We're capturing. a big win right in its big, beautiful face. Zone in jeopardy. You're about to win this. Don't choke in the real or figurative sense.
Go make some friends.
Zone moving elsewhere. We're capturing. Zone contested. Zone imperiled. Zone's moving. Capture zone at risk. That's a homicide. You've achieved. Zone compromised.
Hope you like spider bots.
Zone contested. Capturing. Shiny new clean thing. Your team won, which means I also win by proxy.
I don't know. We are living in very strange times, aren't we? In which questions that would have seemed absurd to ask just a short while ago are now considered too difficult to answer without some kind of specialized degree or education, like a biology degree. Like the question, what is a woman? We can say endless things about women's rights, but without ever actually defining our terms as we do so. And yet, this
So
is
they have
incredibly
so they-
intuitive. For example,
every
there's
week I
a
go to
website
this
that I'm in
science
the
lab.
habit
They study
of
my
visiting from
side.
time to time, which uses
Every
one
week.
of those CAPTCHA security checks to make sure that you're not a
Science
robot.
studies
And one of the questions it asks is a grid of low-resolution portraits that it says, click on all the women. And somehow, I've never gotten that answer wrong. The Google one with all the crosswalks or the boats or the trains or whatever, I've been denied access several times because of that. But the men's and women's faces, I've nailed it every
Oh, cocksucking.
now,
Bro, all
how
you
is that
niggas on my
possible
dick,
when
bro.
I'm not
On my
able to
side,
ask
bro.
them
Go
what their
fucking, yeah,
pronouns
go
are?
that one.
How is it possible
Straight,
that
Say
straight,
word
very
B.
smart and educated academics,
Straight, straight, you fucking idiot.
they resort to textbook circular translation before just falling apart?
You're in a game with a mini X hot, bro. You heard me?
Whether they know it or not,
Oh
because
my
they
god,
are
nigga.
significantly conditioned by a philosophical school of thought called nominalism. Today, nominalism is the prevailing philosophy. According to a few statistics that I read, most philosophers surveyed described themselves as nominalists. Nominalism holds
Me
that
cat B? Are you guys trolling right now?
universals, like woman, they don't actually exist.
Yeah, bro, my
Like the
team is
particular
trolling, bro.
person
Yo,
sharing
say,
who
say to me, bro. That's you. Oh, you're saying you
as
fucking idiot.
woman is
Sorry,
just a
bro.
name
I was reloading.
it doesn't actually correlate to anything in reality.
Side game,
It's
side
just
game.
Cat B. There's cat B and hold D. I'll tell you
Banana is
guys
just a name
Come on,
we
like,
give
Copy,
kind
copy.
of tricky to open, but
Oh, you into that
to
beat?
actually figure out. Nominalism denies that the essence of a particular
one?
thing exists.
enemy
It
is
says
making so
that when you say dog or
Oh my god, this big ass
Wait,
nigga, bro.
Spawn flip on this game? Spawn flip on this game?
or even the thing, you're actually saying something about yourself, just your own mind's way of organizing things into categories and then articulating
Oh, he
them.
spawns. Wait, that's so weird.
But come on. Does anyone actually believe that? I don't believe for a second that anyone who
Bro, they're all that
describes
fucking
themselves as
B,
a
bro. They're all on
actually
me,
lives their
nigga. Oh
life
my
as if
god.
that's true, because it refutes itself in practice, if not also in principle. It refutes the utility of using names to describe things. We wouldn't actually be able to come up with and consistently use names for things if they didn't
There's Cold B,
correlate
Hold
with
B.
universals.
C, Hold B,
Given a
heavy.
name to.
Everybody go B.
Like imagine a friend of yours who's traveling to a foreign land and they're telling you to explain that they actually have cats too, but they aren't like our cats. They have scales instead of fur, and they only have one eye. They have a beak. They have to live exclusively underwater. Wouldn't you be sort of justified if you replied, then why do you call that a cat? If nominalism were true, there would be nothing amiss about someone doing that. And that's what most everyday conversations would be like, where the names we use for things are entirely at the mercy of our own usage, objects of the external world.
Oh, fuck, bro.
Why does
Yo, yo.
anybody believe this? The reason that nominalism is so attractive for so many people, especially philosophers, is because it rejects the need that
Oh my god, he's so bad. Someone kill this kid.
oldest riddles that thinking people have been wrestling with for as long as we can think. For example, how can a thing change and still be itself? That seems kind of absurd because we just know that it's still itself, but how do you actually rationally make sense?
Yo, they're taking out other one, bro. They're taking out other one.
Rationally. Like me, for example, I've changed dramatically over the span of time. Like, I resent
fucking
embarrassing
faggot,
stories that my
nigga.
parents tell about me from like when I was 9 years old. And then at the end, they always punctuate
No,
it with
he was behind
annoying question. They say,
Yo, this kid was behind
do
me.
you remember when you did
This
this?
nigga's
And
a
I'm
faggot.
thinking to myself, like,
Yo, he
physically,
has to be trolling,
physiologically
bro.
speaking, you're
What a
not even
faggot,
talking
bro.
to the same human anymore. Why should I be embarrassed?
Oh my god, get slammed,
Virtually
nigga.
everything about me has changed. I weigh 3 times as much as I did then. I speak and act in a way that is unrecognizable to that little boy. Virtually my entire cellular composition has been. And my beard is at least a little bit thicker. If you only knew me when I was 9 years old and you were reintroduced to me now, you might as well be introduced to a new person. And yet, you will never convince my parents that the person they knew when I was 9 is not right now.
Go, please,
How
bro.
do
Let's
we
go, let's go.
rationally make sense of this? so dramatically in almost every empirical way and still be itself. The ancient philosopher Heraclitus put it this way: a man never steps in the same river twice. What he means by this is that the last time you stepped in a river, it was an entirely different molecules of water, different fish,
Oh my god, get slammed, nigga.
yet we don't have standing on every riverbank ready to rename the river.
Slave, nigga, fuck, nigga.
Everything. Because the old name doesn't apply to
Fuck,
it.
nigga.
But if nominalism were true,
Copy,
that would be legitimate and maybe even crossing the Mississippi, the person on the other end receiving that information would have to be like, what's the Mississippi again? And the other person would have to explain everything that is particular to
Oh, one shot.
Mississippi.
Yo, this belly needs to lock out. They need to make
particular
this
river
shut
at that
that
particular how a thing
My
can
belly
change
should
and
be
still be
locked
itself, or
out.
how a thing can be one and many at the same time, like there can be many dogs in one instance of dog, is a riddle that was solved by metaphysics. Metaphysics is the thought that introduces the concept of being. That
Slam!
all
Oh my
dogs
god,
have a
I'm so
particular
good
kind
this
of
game!
being,
Oh my
nature
god,
that
I'm
is
so
shared among them. Which is why when we apply
my
names to that
god!
being or that
With a
universal,
pistol,
it makes
nigga!
sense to other
Running
human
around their
beings to
whole
whom it is
squad.
communicated. In order to define a thing,
I'm gonna be right here. This nigga's
you have to
shit.
look at variables other than just its material composition. You have to look at something like N. You have to look at something like its form. How is the matter that it's composed of arranged in a certain way to be what it is? A table is made of wood, and a chair could be made of the exact same wood, but the form and the purpose distinguish them for us. So what is it that's common to every particular human being
Oh, he has a
so that the word
flamethrower.
human makes sense to us and can be applied to all of those particular instances? What is its nature or its essence? Because its nature doesn't exist in space and time, I can't point to the
Slayer, I invited you to a party. Join that shit after.
I can only point to a particular. And as soon as you admit that, things start to get a little bit spooky, right? This is all starting to sound a little bit paranormal, don't you think? If universals exist, these spaceless, timeless pictures of reality, and they permeate all of your knowledge, then that suggests that you yourself, or at least the rational part of you, is also spaceless. Because it knows about these things and it even kind of interacts with them in a certain way. And it does so skeptics don't like admitting this. So nominalism suddenly appears like a clever rescue line to get out of all of this paranormal metaphysics. But again, here's the fatal flaw in nominalism. Nobody lives as if it's true. Like imagine a committed nominalist who really lives his life as if this were true. We've been invited over for dinner to the neighbor's house and they asked us to bring over a fruit tray. So I need you to stop at the grocery store and pick up this list of fruit. And the list includes things like raspberries and strawberries, blueberries, apples, pears, oranges, and grapefruits. And he says, yeah, no problem. I've done this 100 times before. I know how to connect those names to the particular things themselves. Even though the names don't describe particular things, they describe universals. Because his wife didn't ask him, go pick up a specific orange-colored fruit with skin on the outside and a nice citrusy flavor. She asked him to get an orange. It can be any decent orange. So he does as he told and he goes to the store, but just before he arrives, something horrible has happened. An act of treachery and terrorism has been committed that